Hello, it's Willow from the Really Big Pants Theatre Company with the second part of Shelved from our book Suddenly and Other Stories, written by Joe Bromley, and the illustrations are by Rosie Alabaster. So, Chapter 6. Back in the children's room, Red was having problems of her own. Benoit and Gig were still arguing over the design for their poster, and Cosmo, one of the younger members of their team, had got bored, given up completely and eaten a crayon. "It is impossible to do this," cried Benoit, throwing his hands up in the air. "We must have the poster to be like this." He began to speak in rapid French, only half of which Red could understand. Gig, meanwhile, had switched to even more rapid sign language to communicate with Red, describing plans for bold lettering and a striking colour palette. As Red's eyes followed the flashing fingers and her ears filled with French, she began to think that perhaps surfing dinosaurs were the way forward. Chapter 7. Norma and Grandma watched Hookham, Bodge and Curdle criss-cross the library with their measuring tapes. Nothing was left unmeasured. "Grandma, I've made an awful mistake," Norma confessed. "If old Mr. Tibbs knew, he'd put me in the defaced books box." "I don't understand, Norma. Tell me, why would you contemplate even a section of the library being wasted like this?" "Oh, because look around you. Look around you, Grandma. A library is a place for books. Books. Not giant cushions and computers and heaven knows what else. It should be a place of calm, a tranquil haven, where the only sound should be the shh of a librarian. I could just about accept audio books, but everything else, clubs, courses, baby dance classes, games nights, language lessons, this group, that group, I could go on and on. I mean, only last week we had a theatre company in, performing in the children's room. A theatre company in a library. 2 grown women dressed in nightwear and prancing around. Some ridiculous yarn about a genie chopping down trees. And the noise the children in the audience made. Shrieks and claps and laughter. Honestly, in a library. For the first time ever, Norma raised her voice. "A library!" "Sounds rather good," replied Grandma. "I wish I'd seen it." "The children should be here to take books out." "Books?" "Well, did the children take books out afterwards?" "Yes, but that's not the point." "But Norma, look what you've done. In trying to get rid of the computers and a comfy place to sit, you've also got rid of all your beloved books." Norma groaned. "I thought they would just put a nice stationery cupboard in that area for a few rolls of packing tape, and I was going to use the rental money they were offering to buy some large print DIY books for the self-help section. Heaven knows Rusty could do with some." "All right," said Grandma. "Let's try and settle this in a civilised manner." She strode over to the men. "Mr. Hookham, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The offer to use a small section of this library as a storage facility has been withdrawn. We would kindly ask you to honour this and to stop measuring things, including me," she added, as Bodge ran a ruler down her back and wrote down his findings. "Perhaps you could simply cancel the order for the excess packing tape. That seems to be a perfectly sensible solution." At that moment, Rusty, with his paintbrush clenched between his teeth, came through the door backwards, trundling a porter's trolley. No," he called, as he tried to manoeuvre it in, bashing the walls on either side. "No, no, 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 no." Everyone looked at each other. "Could you say that again, please?" asked Norma. Rusty took the paintbrush out of his mouth and repeated himself. "There's a huge lorry outside full of this stuff," He awkwardly steered the trolley round, accidentally knocking the door shut in the process, to reveal it was precariously laden with packing tape. And there it is. And the driver, Marge, says she's got orders to start shipping out all the books once the tape is unloaded. What's going on? Norma gasped. No, no! Oh, what have I done? I shall chain myself to a shelf. Oh, I think I've got some handcuffs in here somewhere. We could use those. Hold on, said Grandma, rummaging through her hair. Don't waste your energy, ladies, said Hookham condescendingly, or your handcuffs. The shelves are staying. It's just these useless books that are going, all of them. Useless? Grandma, Norma and Rusty cried in unison. That did it. Grandma rolled up her sleeves. Rusty rolled the trolley over his own foot and yelped. And Norma unleashed a battle cry, the loudest sound she had ever made in the library or anywhere else. She raced across the room and grabbed the paintbrush from Rusty, then advanced on Hookham, brandishing it. Get out of this library, you nasty man! You'll never take these books. Our company policy is to take threats of physical violence very seriously. I'm calling for backup, blustered Hookham, backing into the DVD display. Rusty, lock the front door, shouted Grandma. Way ahead of you, G-Ma. It should have been left propped open to dry, but that blooming trolley put paid to that. The wet paint will have sealed the door shut by now. We're all stuck in here. There was a pause as this news sunk in, ending when Norma clonked Hookham with the paintbrush. No backup for you, then. Take that. Curdle came hurtling from the tiny staff kitchen, where he had been measuring the kitchen sink to defend his colleague. Rusty stepped in to block his path, and the two of them began to tussle, sending rolls of tape flying. Grandma's hair bristled as she assessed the situation. She was more than capable of taking care of these baddies who were threatening the library, but Rusty needed help. Despite still relying on his mother to tie his shoelaces, Curdle was fighting dirty, and Rusty was not handy when it came to fisticuffs, and Bodge was nowhere to be seen. Grandma glanced through the glass into the children's room. Gig was laughing uproariously at somebody's joke and caught Grandma's eye. The little girl waved happily at her. Grandma smiled. A book flaps army. She began to sign to Gig, quickly but clearly, explaining what she wanted the children to do. Gig watched carefully and nodded, before turning to alert read. The fight was on. Chapter 8. Curdle had easily overcome Rusty and tied the poor caretaker's hands together with a fabric measuring tape. He'd shoved a book in his mouth for good measure and rolled him under a shelf. Norma had been swiping at Hookham with the paintbrush as though her life depended on it, splattering paint over his expensive suit. He had run to the door and tried to wrench it open, but it was indeed stuck fast. She chased him round the library, making more noise than she had ever made in her entire life. Grandma thought it was probably good for Norma to be getting things out of her system, and let her get on with it. But when Curdle joined the chase and cornered Norma, she prepared to take action and dropped into an expert karate stance. This was when they heard the rumble, the stampede of dozens of little to really quite big feet approaching. Charge! Yelled the whole Book Flaps army as the children tore into the main library. There they all are. They were followed by Nadia, who rushed to help Rusty. The children swarmed throughout the space, whooping and bellowing. Some of them descended on Hookham, who pleaded for mercy as they walloped and biffed him. Naomi landed a mighty punch, and Hebe scored a swift kick on his shin as Grandma turned a blind eye. But in the mayhem, Curdle managed to grab Norma and hold her captive. Right, you horrible kids, he shouted. None of you move, or the librarian gets it. This is what's going to happen. When I say so, you're all going to start piling these stupid books by the door, and no funny business. We've come here to fill this building with packing tape, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Hookham, come and hold Miss Dimple. The rest of you, shh. Let's have silence in the library. Hookham, bedraggled and whimpering, shook himself free of the children, including Cosmo, who was tenaciously biting his ankle, and made his way over to Norma. I hate kids, he snivelled, even more than I hate books. I'm especially glad your ridiculous room will be crammed with packing tape. Which is when Red had an idea. The children were spread out everywhere. She called out in French, Benoit, où es-tu? His reply came from over the other side of the library by the abandoned trolley. Ici, Red, ici. This was exactly what Red wanted to hear. She started to give him instructions in French. Hookham and Curdle looked at each other in alarm, and then at Red. Stop that! What are you saying? What's that language? Said Hookham. Unbeknownst to them, Red had told Benoit to pass rolls of packing tape to each member of the book club and prepare to strike. As Hookham and Curdle both made their way menacingly towards Red, they were swooped upon by a throng of angry children armed with tape, and thanks to all their craft activities, they knew exactly what to do with that tape. In a matter of minutes, both men were tightly parcelled up like Egyptian mummies, their arms wrapped tightly to their sides and their legs bound together. Then the children took great pleasure in taping them to each other, back to back. Hookham hollered, and Curdle cursed until Grandma, proudly supervising, gave Red the nod. Red ripped off a piece of tape and passed it to Gig, who stuck it over Hookham's mouth, and then she ripped off another piece of tape and passed it to Benoit, who stuck it over Curdle's mouth with a flourish. Silence in the library, no? He said. Voila! Maeve broke into an impressive impromptu street dance in celebration, cheered on by all. Chapter 9. Well done, gang, said Grandma. There's nothing like teamwork. Hold on, said Norma, quickly recovering from her ordeal. What about the other one, Bodge? Oh, and where's Beatrix? Said Alex, scanning all the faces. She's on my team, but I can't see her. Everybody rushed to check behind each shelf and search all the areas, until Red stopped and pointed through the glass into the children's room. There they are, she exclaimed. Look! Bodge and Beatrix were sitting on a cushion with a book. She was reading it to him. They all ran into the room. What's going on? Beatrix, are you okay? Asked Grandma. Yes, I'm fine, she said. I'm reading Mr. Bodge a story. He reminds me of my pops. Bodge looked up, his eyes shining. This is such a wonderful book. I remember it from when I was a boy. It was my favourite story. Beatrix has been reading it to me. Grandma and Norma glanced at each other. Well, that's nice, said Norma. I feel sad that we ever tried to get rid of all the books in here. I'm so sorry. I'm going to make sure that all that packing tape gets returned. Well, some of the packing tape has just been used, actually, admitted Grandma. Well, most of the tape, then, said Bodge. That would be very kind of you, said Norma graciously. Beatrix looked at Bodge and then at Norma. Can Mr. Bodge join our book club? She asked. That's a lovely suggestion, Beatrix. Mr. Bodge is possibly a little bit old for book flaps, but he's more than welcome to join our Dusty Jackets group for grown-ups. Norma paused. And there are a great many other clubs and classes available here at the library, which I'd be more than happy to tell him about. I've got a suggestion too, said Nadia. Why don't we ask Mr. Bodge if he'd like to choose which poster goes on the notice board for us? Oh, that is a good suggestion, cried Benoit. I think ours will be the one, no? All the team scrambled to fetch their posters to present to Bodge, including the incredibly sticky, glue-based one. There was lots of excited pushing and shoving and clamour, but when it came down to it, the dinosaur was a clear-cut winner. And there it is. Chapter 10. The hour was up. It was time to go. Besides, the OAP Rap Writing Performance Poetry Club would be arriving soon, and they were notoriously touchy about being kept waiting. What will prise that door open? Grandma reached into her hair for an old bread knife, then ran it round the seal. She stood back and gave the door a hefty kick. There we go. Freedom, she declared. Although you'll need to repaint, I'm afraid, Rusty. Norma patted Grandma's arm. That's not a problem, Grandma, she said. Rusty and I are going to make Flappington Library fabulous. You've all convinced me that a great library isn't just a place for books, but a place for people to come together and do a variety of wonderful things. Bodge bundled Hookham and Curdle, still parcelled up and looking very sorry for themselves, into the back of the lorry. He swung himself up into the cab as Marge revved the engine, ready to return the packing tape. Everybody gathered on the pavement to wave goodbye, and Bodge proudly flaunted his new library card and a copy of the book for discussion at Tuesday's Dusty Jackets meeting. And there it is. It's a whodunit. Look out for the gardener in Chapter 3, called Grandma. He's decidedly shifty. Grandma, Bodge shouted as they drove off with a honk of the horn. No spoilers! Chapter 11. We'd better get going, Red, said Grandma. She had taken a sandwich from her hair and was eating it. I really am flying to the moon this afternoon. When I was an astronaut with Neil Armstrong, we always... Oh, would you like a bite, dear? She offered the sandwich to Benoit, standing beside her. Non merci, grand-mère, he replied, wagging a finger at her. Mais bon appétit. Red hugged her friends goodbye. Au revoir, Rouge, said Benoit, ever the joker, as Gig and Red rolled their eyes and blew raspberries at him. Grandma saluted Norma. You're a wonderful librarian, dear. The people of Flappington are lucky to have you, she told her. And old Mr. Tibbs would be very proud. Oh, and have a go at some rap writing. I think you'd be very good at it. Grandma and Red headed back to their treehouse, both of them carrying treasured library books to start reading later. Grandma, I've just realised, said Red, you weren't wearing your really big pants to fight the baddies. Grandma smiled. Well spotted, dear. We'll just have to have another adventure then, won't we? The end. And there's the last illustration. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed that.